Morning, everybody. I'm sure there'll be some people coming in. We have a pretty good list of people who signed up for today. It is Friday morning, so I know some people might be getting a later start. Certainly, but we're gonna get moving here. This webinar will be recorded and so that we can share it, so you can share it with others if people couldn't join us, and you'll also receive the in addition to a link for the recording, you'll get the webinar slides. And so if you feel like sharing this with others, that's fine. As Lori mentioned, certainly we're going to be taking questions at the end. So this will be webinar format, which means I will be essentially presenting to you throughout the course of the next hour. And but if you have any specific questions, what I suggest is that you just put them in the chat, and that way we'll be able to address those at the very end. So with that, I'm going to get started. I'm going to dig in, and I hope everyone's has had a great week, and I hope you have a great Friday. Let's see if we can get it kicked off with a bang for you. So today's topic, the power of expectations, and I think I can successfully and confidently say that the expectations, I don't believe, are set as well as they could be. And I'm not suggesting people aren't trying, leaders aren't trying, but there are occasions where employees can be confused. There can be some ambiguity, lacking clarity. So the power of setting expectations effectively, I probably should have added that in parentheses at the end of the title, that the power of effective expectations, there's a huge difference. It might not seem like it's a lot, but it does have a pretty significant impact on the outcome of how things work. So we have 4 talking points today. So number 1, setting expectations sets people up for success. Clearly, it's really all about how do we set people up for success so that they can achieve for themselves, for the team, for the organization. It does promote accountability. I'm going to talk about culture of accountability when we get to that particular section. It also facilitates difficult conversations. And what I mean by that, if someone's struggling, not performing, consistently underperforming, clear expectations make it very, very easy to have conversations that can be difficult. Most people don't like confrontation. Those are the difficult conversations. And then finally, it drives us towards defined results. It's pretty simple, but if we set clear targets, in other words, clear expectations, it really makes it easier to figure out what actions, how we need to plan, the actions, the strategies, what we need to do to achieve if we know what the target looks like. So those are the 4 topics. Let me get into the first one here. I will move through these reasonably quickly, but like I said, we will be checking the chat to make sure that if there's anything along the way. I have no issue being interrupted. Lori can chime in if there's something quite urgent, but certainly we'll have time at the end, just as a reminder. So let's talk about setting people up for success. So if we set expectations clearly, that's not just results. It's also in the form of definitions of roles, responsibilities. One piece that isn't on the slide here is authority level. What sort of authority do I have? That's a big one. If you're going to give people responsibility, make sure they have the appropriate authority, or as a minimum, they understand what their authority is. Even if they have 0 authority, let them know that. Let them, let's make sure they're absolutely clear on what that authority level is. But there's various levels of authority. When I get into some upcoming slides, you'll certainly see what that might mean. All right, let's see here. So the next point of, 1 second here, I had a pop-up for some reason. There we go. All right. So the next point is it establishes measurable objectives. If we think about, as people, individuals, we think about teams, we think about organizations, we need to measure our success, both lagging, meaning what did we achieve, and the incremental leading indicators. How are we doing along the way? Both very, very important. But that's if we're not absolutely clear on what that is, that can create some real challenges along the way. If we get to the end of the year and then we measure the results only at the end of the year, or at the end of a month, we might say, oh, well, we hit the goal or we didn't hit the goal. That's not adequate. We have to be sure we have the lagging indicators, which are those that I just mentioned, and the leading are those incremental things that we look at, the actions, the frequency of the things we need to do along the way, and if we can measure those as well. For instance, if we think about a sales team, the ultimate goal might be revenue, but along the way, we need to have um, uh, good conversations with potential clients. We need to have presentations with clients, potential clients. We need to have proposals. Those are all leading indicators to the lagging, which is the ultimately could be won deals or won opportunities or revenues. So that's an idea. So we want to make sure we have clear, measurable objectives. It does reduce the ambiguity in tasks. And what I mean by that is, if our activity, our actions, our tasks are aligned well with the goal, the expectation, it makes it a lot easier. And this is a function of individuals. It's a function of also the team, people working together. Are we all moving in the same direction towards the ultimate expectation? And expectations can be in the form of results, specific results, but it can also be in the form of what we expect in terms of standardization of process, how we do things. It could be behavior. It could be related to culture as well. And then the last item here, it enhances job satisfaction. And I think this one is for some leaders out there is not considered often enough, that if we are clear with our people, we're clear with our employees, our team members, as individuals and as entire teams, if we're absolutely clear on what the expectation is, where responsibilities start and end, where authority starts and ends, what success looks like, how we do things together, how we achieve together, it does make for much greater job satisfaction. It's that ambiguity that can create dissatisfaction, confusion, people not understanding what success looks like for themselves. And if you think about at a very human level, everybody wants to understand, what does it mean to be successful? How do I measure that? How do I know that? How do I know I'm being successful? And through my years of doing what I've done and working with leaders, coaching people, leadership development programs, I often hear it's like, well, what is wrong with my employee? And I say, well, wait a minute, let's do a sanity check here. Let's make sure as a leader, a leader, manager, that you've done the right things first. You've set people up for success. You've set clear expectations, so there isn't any guesswork in it. That is a big piece of this. And that's where we have to take the time to make sure that clarity is there, because it isn't always there. And I've troubleshot many different situations, and I ask is, okay, well, what was the expectation? What did success look like for this person? Do they understand it? And taking them through a process of unraveling it, and oftentimes we'll find gaps. So that's really important in terms of the job satisfaction for individuals. And today, I know today's climate, we have a mix of different people, different types, different generations. Job satisfaction is critical, not just for retaining your top talent, but also just to ensure that you have a good, solid, effective culture where you're going to attract the best people. So I'm going to take you just to a model here, which I want to share with you, that will help in terms of setting expectation. In my training programs, and specifically, I use this with delegation, but I use it for other things. But if we think about, if you're going to empower people, if you're going to share responsibility with people, there's a good way to do it. And there's other ways that aren't as ideal. Dumping tasks, responsibility on people without a frame of reference or context certainly can be very, very interesting, where people might get confused. So here's the empowerment matrix. You'll see 5 areas. The first thing you want to do is be absolutely crystal clear, whether it's someone's job, a new responsibility, a new project. You want to be crystal clear in terms of what is the role, what is it all about, what's the description. Being as descriptive as possible is very, very important. The boundary conditions, I'm going to go into that in a little more detail in just a second, but the boundary conditions set the conditions for success. People need information and knowledge. That's an obvious one, but we oftentimes don't share enough information and knowledge, or we don't make it easily accessible. And information and knowledge could be um, the the requisite detail that people need to have a frame of reference around all the parts and pieces that they're going to need to be successful with a particular task. Where is it? Is it on a computer drive somewhere? Is it buried in someone else's computer? It could also be individuals who have that information. Do they have access? People also need very specific skills, and do they have those skills that are going to help them? It could be hard skills, the technical aspect of something, but it could also be the soft skills, how they work with people, how they collaborate. And then resources. Resources in an organization are absolutely critical. And resources oftentimes are people. Where do I get this? Who do I need? Who do I need to engage? Who are the people who may be affected by the decisions or the work that I'm doing? So these are 5 areas. If we provide all of this information to people when we're sharing responsibility, setting expectation, it almost eliminates ambiguity. And that's really the key here. Let me just talk a little bit more about the boundary conditions. And you'll notice in the middle of this box, it says leaders define the boundaries and then coach people to be self-performing. That's really what we want. We want people to be self-performing. We don't want to micromanage. We don't want to hover. We want people to feel capable, good, confident in their own right. What the boundary conditions do, they set up the conditions that allow people to be successful and operate autonomously or within reason. The 3 things are, what are the results and expectations? Meaning, when you complete this task, when you do your job, this project, this initiative, what does success look like? That's how you work with people. You help them define it or you define it for them, but that's really, really critical. Timelines, when are things due? Oftentimes, things are delegated by leaders, and there's no timelines. Well, at least they're not overt. They're not out there in the ether, where everyone or the leader and the employee understand. It's more arbitrary. We want to be absolutely clear on timelines. If it's something huge, a big initiative, we want to ensure we have milestones. I talked about authority level earlier. It could be authority level. It doesn't matter what the authority level is. It does matter that the individual knows what it is. Do I have the ability to make the decision? To what degree? How much authority? How far can I go? It could be you have no authority all the way to fully autonomous. You make the decision, or something in between. Hey, come see me first before you pull the trigger on that decision. You decide what that is, but make sure they know. And then non-negotiables are just that. It's a line that cannot be crossed. So I put this in a box because I want people to understand, and leaders specifically, that we don't want to make the box too small. We don't want to make it too big. And that's a function of the individual that you are delegating to or sharing responsibility with, or in other terms, setting expectations. Make that box appropriate to the capabilities, the confidence, the competency of the person you're setting expectations with. And you might look at this and say, wow, that seems like a lot of work. Do it. Make it clear, and a lot of your problems disappear, meaning your confidence in sharing responsibility and setting expectation with people builds a strong trusting relationship with that individual or individuals around you. All right, let's move on to the next point. We want to promote accountability or create accountability. Earlier, I talked about, in the introduction, I talked about building a culture of accountability. So when I say the word accountability, a lot of people cringe. It means, oh, I'm not a micromanager. I don't want to hover over people. I don't want to hold people accountable. And honestly, I don't want you to hold people accountable either, meaning the action of having to have a difficult conversation or a sense of micromanaging. A culture of accountability is really all about setting the conditions where people can hold themselves accountable. They know what it looks like. They know what it means to be accountable themselves. So let's go through some of these bullets here. Encourages ownership of actions and outcomes. I think if we're really clear on with expectations, what happens is people build their own sense of what that looks like, what they need to do, and what they need to achieve. They will. You do want to keep that door open for people to come to you. That's the supportive behavior. So there's two basic kinds of leadership behavior or management behavior. There's the directive, do it this way, do this, do that, and then the supportive, meaning they're coming to you. You need to find the balance there that works for the individual, and it is by individual. But it certainly does encourage ownership, and that's what we want. If people feel like they own something, you don't have to worry about it, meaning they are going to achieve because they feel like they own it. It does foster a culture of trust. So if we're absolutely clear on expectations, that trust, that component is really critical. What trust does, if you as a manager or leader trust your people, that trust comes back to you from them, but it also gives you that confidence that you need. And oftentimes when I hear, well, why don't you delegate? Or why are you struggling with delegating and sharing responsibility? And many people say, I just don't trust people are going to do it as well as I am. And they may not, but that lack of trust, what it will do, it creates an atmosphere where people feel like they're being looked, their shoulder, someone's looking over their shoulder. They may not be doing it well enough. They want to know that you as the leader, their manager, trusts them to get it done, which means we have to allow a little bit of room for mistakes. Not a bad thing. That's how you've learned to be successful, through your mistakes. We learn far more from our mistakes than we do from our successes. It's unfortunate, but that certainly is a reality. When someone's doing well and you succeed, rarely do people stop and say, why was I successful? We take it at face value. When we have a failure or we make a mistake, we do analyze it more deeply to give us an understanding. And all of this is all about a measurement against the expectation. It's certainly the third bullet here clarifies deliverables and timelines. I think that speaks for itself. I've really talked about that already, but it does, we have to be sure that that accountability component is built around a framework. And I talked about that in the previous point. And then the last one I think is interesting. It supports reliable team performance. And I think we forget about that sometimes. We think about how individuals work. We think about the performance of individuals, but do we take the time to think about how well a team functions? Because I always, in my experience, if you put two people on an initiative or on a project or on a task, I believe that through that, it provided it's a collaborative and effective relationship. I do believe the outcome is going to be better, faster in general, like over time, better, faster than if just one individual is working on it. We need different perspectives, different views, checks and balances. This is where the accountability component and expectations in themselves, that we have accountability, an atmosphere of or a culture of accountability, then teams really know how to get there quicker, faster, and they know how to self-correct along the way. And of course, there's all different types of teams out there. We have leadership teams, we have functional area teams, we have project teams. They are so critical in the success of our organizations and ensuring we have sustainability over the long run. So let me talk a little bit about how teams work. And if you think about the function of a team, there are really three pieces that I look at. And when I think about leaders and thinking about the performance of their teams, I promote these three things, making sure you understand them and make sure you have a framework within your mindset and how you build these teams and how you measure performance. So the first thing is why the team exists. This is your team charter. I'm going to dig into that one a little bit more. The team charter speaks to why your team exists related to, in the umbrella of your organization. Are you serving internal customers, external customers? Are you part of the overall value chain of the business? These are the things we want to think about. Um, the design, the what the team does, and I think that oftentimes is reasonably clear, but I see very, very often the standard, SOP, standard operating procedures, or standard process, our approach. There is oftentimes, especially for companies that are growing quickly, we don't take the time to standardize, to say, look, this is how we need to do it. This is the best way. Every successful business, highly successful business, has standard process for repeatability and scalability. Teams, people need it, teams need it, organizations need it. We have to have that. And then the last one is relationships, how the team members relate. And it really is up to the leader to pay attention to that. What is our team dynamic? Do we have a good culture? I read an interesting article recently about uh, what people when people leave an organization. Well, we hear, hey, they leave their manager. Well, oftentimes it's a function of the team. And we've talked about, are they leaving the company, or are they leaving the manager, or are they leaving the team? And in this article, it talked about people spend a lot of time thinking about, do I enjoy my team members? Do I enjoy being here? Do I feel part of this group? And if they feel good about their team, they feel welcome, they feel part of it, they feel they know how to achieve, they have a tendency to be happier, more engaged, and they produce better outcomes. They may not even like their company as much as the team, as long as the team and their manager they have a lot of respect and trust. They're going to be happier, and they're going to be more successful and more effective employees. So think about that as we go through it. Let me talk a little bit about the charter. Let me just go to the next slide. So oftentimes teams, this is the goal or the strategy for a team or an organization. Hey, let's just do more. And honestly, that's not good enough. That is not about setting expectations. More means absolutely nothing. More could mean zero. It could mean a million. It means zero in terms of how do we engage people, keep them motivated and interested in what they're doing. So these are the 5 things I encourage leaders to think about when they want to build a strong team charter. The first one is, who are we accountable to, right? So that could be an external customer, it could be an internal customer, it could be a different department. But you're also accountable to the employees. You're accountable to the owners of the business, or the CEO, the leadership team. You're accountable to your own families. Hey, I want to be successful. So we have to think about, and I know I'm broadening that a little bit, but if you think about building a strong team, let's make sure we know who we are accountable to, so that we can be effective in delivering the promised outcomes that we have stated we will do. That goes to item number 2 here. What are you expected to accomplish? And that relates to who you're accountable to. And it's not just the external customer, because if you think about the value chain of your business, and the value chain, a very simple value chain could be, we have a marketing team, we have a sales team, we have a production team, we have a logistics team, and that is your value chain. The value runs across those different silos. And by the way, don't break down silos. Please don't do that. Silos are really important. Just learn how to operate across silos. That's really the key here. But we have to make sure we know, what are we expected to accomplish for the people or the teams or the entities that we're accountable to, and then we can figure it out. A great way to understand or to measure how well you're doing with your internal customers. A marketing group might be accountable to, or might be a partner with, or a internal customer to the sales team, as an example. A great way to see how you're doing is interview your internal customer, and you ask them 3 questions. What are the top 3 things that are important to you? How are we doing in those 3 areas? And what can I do, or what can we do to be more effective? It can be a scary question to ask, or scary questions to ask, but the outcome or the feedback you get, critical. The third item on the list here, why do you exist? And that should be very, very straightforward, very fundamental. And the why you exist piece could have multiple elements depending on who you're accountable to, but we have to know why we exist. A production team, the existence might be, why a production team might exist is to produce the best products, to serve the customers and ensure that there's innovation in the long run to sustain or to help the company be successful in the long run. That could be an existence statement. It doesn't matter what it is. It does matter that people understand it. And I think that's a critical piece. A lot of people come to work and they just do a job without really clarity on why they're doing what they're doing. Like, why do we do this? Items 4 and 5, I'll hit those quickly here. What kind of team do you want to be? And that goes to characteristics. It speaks to the team's character. And then the 5 is, how will you work together? And those are typically statements that say we will, and it speaks to actual behaviors. If you spend the time, and it doesn't mean you have to talk about this every day, but if you work with your team to define these, or just honestly, you could do this in a half an hour. You could go through this exercise, get people to really think about their purpose within the team. This sets the stage. It sets the expectation for how a team can be highly successful. All right, we're doing well here. We're about the halfway point, and I'm going to hit number 3 here. So facilitates difficult conversations. Now, when I talk about difficult conversations, what I mean is it's those conversations you have to have in terms of potentially corrective actions. Someone on your team, one of your team members, one of your employees has had a tough day, they've made some mistakes, or they're consistently making the same mistake over and over. We will oftentimes, I would say a good chunk of the population, probably better than 50%, maybe 75%, absolutely hates to have any conversation that is truly difficult because it's wrapped around confrontation. Conflict in an organization, in a business, is a good thing. It's healthy. Now, how you conduct these difficult conversations will have an impact on how well it goes and whether or not you get the right outcome. But at the same time, good, healthy conflict leads to corrective action. It leads to better performance. It leads to employee growth. And if you think about any team out there, any organization, let's take a professional sports team. There's coaches, all types of coaches in those teams. What is their job? It's to help employees, or help the players in this case, improve, see their strengths, very important, also see their weaknesses, and help them move forward to be the best they can be, right? Well, that's no different in business. We have to do that, and it's our obligation. So are you being a good mentor and coach to the people around you? And if you are, that means on occasion, you're having those difficult conversations. So if we think about those and expectations, so if we have to have a difficult conversation, if we set the expectation, it creates a reference framework. There's no guesswork around what people should be doing, how they should be performing. It creates a very simple framework. So if these difficult conversations aren't that difficult, meaning it should be clear. Now, if your difficult conversation is so difficult and you're struggling with it, you might want to do a check. Have I set the expectation correctly? And if you haven't, I would wait on having that performance-related conversation, that difficult conversation. I would pull back and say, wait a minute, I haven't done everything I need to do. I have not set this person up for success. But let's just assume you've done a great job of setting the expectation, then it does create that framework for that conversation. It does enable objective discussions. Oftentimes, when you have to confront or have a conversation around performance, it can go a little emotional or subjective. We want to eliminate as much of that as possible. That's eliminating the ambiguity from an earlier point. So we can be objective. It makes that conversation go easier. And individuals, people who you have to work with, your employees, they're saying, okay, yes, I see it. I remember the conversation. I do recognize the expectation. Yes, it becomes more black and white. It does reduce the confrontation in feedback, meaning people don't want to feel attacked. You're not describing, if you're having a conversation around performance, it's not about the human being. Uh, it's really about the action, the outcome, the result, the behaviors that you've witnessed, and you're helping them, right? So if something goes sideways, how does that conversation need to occur? It's not the why did you do that? That's going to set people up in a defensive fashion. What you want to do is ask a question like, what led you to that decision? Or what do you think is happening? This error has happened 3 times. What do you think is happening, or what was your process? What's going on and how you do it? Let's work backward and try to figure out what's happening here. So you're not going after the person, you're going after the actions. And that's where you're really eliminating the confrontation. And then finally, it guides performance improvement. I think that's an obvious one. If we've set the expectation correctly, there's a benchmark. Okay, am I improving? Am I not improving? And that's where we want to ensure that we have absolute clarity through this process, through the expectations, so that people know how to improve. What does improvement look like? And some people are saying, no, I'm fine. I'm performing at my best. Well, I might argue to say, well, I think we can all improve. Right? We all have the ability to get better at what we do, not just in the skills and the outcomes, but how we treat people, our leadership mindset, our emotional intelligence, a lot of the skills we need to succeed, not just in business, but in life. So let me talk a little bit about how can we have difficult conversations. And I think for some people, this process of addressing poor performance or problematic performance can be a little daunting. So this is not the actual method, I mean the steps in having that conversation. These are more the guidelines I want you to consider when you have a difficult conversation. So you see the first bullet here is establish clear expectations. It is very, very difficult to have a conversation around performance if you've not been clear. It's almost impossible. And I do see a lot of leaders who think they've been clear, who believe they've set the expectation clearly. And then they have the conversation and it doesn't go as well as they wanted to because there's confusion on both sides, or there's a lack of alignment. So this is very, number one, make sure that you've set expectations. So if you encounter an employee who's struggling, dealing with the same issues over and over, there's really what I consider to be 4 things you want to look at. One of them is expectations, but let me break it down into 2 components first. It's willingness. Are they willing to perform better? And hopefully most people are. And then there's capability. Those are the 2 pieces. Do people have the capability? You can coach them on capability. You can help them. You can help them grow and develop. The willingness has to be there, meaning they need to be coachable. They need to want to improve. If I break it down even further, the 4 elements are setting expectations clear. So if you're trying to figure out if someone's not performing well, the first one is, have you set expectations clearly? 2, do they have all the resources they need to be successful? Do they have all the skills they need to be successful? And then the last one, and this is where you do have some control, but not full control. It's a little more challenging, is their attitude. And what I mean by that is, are their beliefs aligned with the success that you want? And that's where someone says, hey, this person has a bad attitude. How do I change that? You go after their beliefs. Anyways, that's just a quick rule of thumb I use to understand what's happening. But let's get back to this list. 1, you want to establish clear expectations. If this is a truly habitual, you're at a point where you've got to put someone on a performance improvement plan, a PIP, you really need to know what your organization's disciplinary procedures are if someone's really underperforming. This is the rare case, but I always put it in here so that if you believe there's a real issue there, what I always say is, like, make sure you consult your HR department. You've got to make sure you do it the right way, so it's going to work out. You got to make sure you do it legally. Again, extreme case, but if you're not sure, make sure you're clear that You understand how things should work so you don't get yourself into hot water. But in most cases, you won't need to do that. It's really more of a routine. Okay, this person's struggling. What do we need to do? Uh, Item three is make sure you recognize that you have the authority to help this person improve. And don't for a minute think you don't. You do. You are there. You have a responsibility to this person, to your team, to the business, to make sure people are performing at least at the, at the fundamental minimum, but we want them to perform higher than that. Uh, Item four is all about, and enforcement might be a strong word, but to make sure that when you are thinking about working with someone, engaging someone on a performance challenge, make sure you're consistent. And what I mean by that is consistent over time, consistent with all the people. You don't want to have any favoritism. Immediate means when you see the issue, um, get on it as soon as you can. Don't wait a month. Don't let things linger. They don't go. Real issues don't go away. So if you see something not going the way it should, it could be a very quick conversation, or it might be something that you need to dig into a little bit. But don't wait. It doesn't improve. It might even fester and get worse. Do remember, there's no hostility and guilt. You're not angry. You're just trying to do the best you can to help this person, and don't feel guilty. You're helping them. Um, uh, Item five, probably one of the most important when you have to have a difficult conversation with somebody. Um, Make sure that you ask for their commitment. And if you don't get a definitive yes, you may have an issue. Now, again, these are extreme cases. Most people want to do well. They want to please themselves. They want to please their team. They want to please you, the company. So you typically don't have a challenge. But what I always suggest is use these exact words after when the conversation is wrapping up. Say, "This is great. I appreciate your time. Hey, I just want to make sure. Do I have your commitment on this?" And then stop talking and see what they say. If you don't get an absolute yes, then you get an issue. I would say 99 times out of 100, you're going to get a definitive yes. And they'd be willing to follow through. And what I mean by that is stay close to it. You don't have to check in every day, but make sure that as you see the person improve, which they likely will if you've done it well, that you recognize and say, "Hey, great. Hey, I see you're doing well here. Wonderful." If they're not, address it. So schedule a time to follow up and say, "Hey, look, let's do a follow-up in a couple of weeks to see how you're doing." And wait to see them. Follow up in a couple of weeks and see how they're doing. All right, we're doing pretty good on time here. Last point, I want to give us a little bit of time for Q&A. And so the last one, I think, again, it speaks to the obviousness of this, but I want to dig into the components here. Setting expectation does drive towards defined results, and those results are defined either by you, they're set by the business. We have to ensure that defined results, they typically come from the top, or they're defined broadly as a business at the top, and they cascade down through the different departments. We have to have clear results. So it does align efforts with goals, right? If we think about that, we think about, I've seen people be highly efficient at doing the wrong things. They say, "Well, I got a lot of work done." Yes, but it didn't produce the results, or it produced the wrong results. So you can be really effective at doing the wrong things. We want to make sure we're being, efficient at the wrong things. You need to be effective, and effectiveness means our efforts are aligned with our goals. It does enhance team cohesion. Certainly, I talked about teams earlier. The cohesion of a team, the effectiveness of a team really has a lot to do with, do we know what we're trying to achieve together? And if we don't have that, if we don't have that team cohesion, it does create a whole lot more work for you. Misalignment, misguided efforts. Sometimes it's poor team morale, poor employee engagement. We want to be sure that we're all, sorry for the analogy, but we're all rowing in the same direction. It does make a lot of sense. The third bullet focuses on outcome-oriented actions. I think that actually, that's kind of a repeat of the first bullet. I just noticed that, but I think I think the idea here is to think about, are we fine-tuning our efforts? The broad brushstrokes are easy. It's the fine brushstrokes that make for a beautiful painting. And I think that if we're not dialed into the day-to-day, how are we doing incremental leading indicator component? If we're not dialed in there, it is very, very difficult to adjust on the fly. I think agility speaks to um, this point beautifully, that if we know what we're doing every day, and if our actions are aligned to the specific outcomes every single day, and if we're measuring them effectively, we know how to adjust on the fly, that agility, that ability to adapt. And then finally, the fourth bullet increases progress towards targets. I think this is all wrapped up into one major category. The big question is, what are those targets? How do we set those? And I want to spend some time talking about key result areas. What should we be measuring? And I think it's very easy to recognize that as a team or a company, we measure things like revenue. We'll measure, um, we might measure effectiveness of teams or people, but we have to look at it more broadly. And here are four categories I want you to think about when you're setting expectations and defining what success looks like. And I use these four areas in everything that I do with organizations, whether it's coaching individuals, helping leaders define exactly what we're doing today, define what success looks like. We're thinking about strategic direction. These four categories are fundamental to every single business on the planet. And I want to be sure we have, like, I want to think about two things. What do we need to do as individuals, as teams, as a company? What do we need to do to be successful in these four categories, key result areas? And how will we measure success in all of these areas? And if we think about both of these, one is the directional component. The directional component is making sure people are behaving or acting in accordance with what success is. And then the measurement component is, how do we know we are doing well, both leading incrementally along the way, as well as lagging once we get to that target, end of the month, end of the quarter, end of the year. And we should be measuring along the way so that we can make course corrections if we need to. If we say these are not the results we expected, incrementally leading, we need to adjust. Now, you don't want to make any major big shifts, big jumps, but you do want to ensure that you are paying attention to it along the way. So if you have to adjust, you can. So let me talk about each one of these. Customer satisfaction, it's really feedback from them. It's not what you think, it's what's real. Now, a lot of companies will say, well, yeah, our customers are happy. My question was, well, how do you know? What are they happy with? And customers oftentimes look at things, very simply, they look at quality. They look at your timeliness. Are you on time? They look at your overall performance. Do you give them a level of service? And cost is in there, right? Now, cost doesn't imply you need to be lowest cost. It means that the value related to the cost or the price you're charging needs to be there. Some people will go out and buy a Mercedes. Others say, no, I don't see the value in that. I see more value in buying a Toyota Camry. They're both cars, but people buy them for different reasons, and they see different value in what they're going to spend. As long as the price value equation works for the individual, or in this case for your customer, it's going to be fine. So this is a category we always want to make sure we're measuring customer satisfaction. The organizational culture and development piece, that is your culture. That is, and is really, it's a function of all the beliefs, attitudes, and practices of everybody in the company. However, the tone of your culture is set at the very, very top, and it cascades down through leadership behavior. Leadership behavior is the biggest, by far, the biggest impact or driver of a healthy culture. And what I tell organizations is define what you want that culture to be, define how you're going to measure it, and then behave in accordance with what you want. I have seen organizations say, this is our culture. And I look at the behaviors and go, they're not matching up as well as you think they are. So I want people to look at that. So that's another category. And culture could be team culture, department culture, organizational culture. It all comes down to the attitudes and work habits of people, and specifically the leaders. The third item here, internal operations. That is the effectiveness and I should say the efficiency and effectiveness of how you get things done in the business. Repeatability, scalability. So some of the items I'm listing here, your process, your systems, the technology you use, the competencies you possess. These are all the things that you have to work on, pay attention to. So again, if you think about critical success factors, what do we need to do to be effective? A lot of that is defined in those items I just listed. How do we measure our success there as well? So really important piece. What I find with this one is if we do a good job of creating some standardization, some process that is repeatable, scalable, people become less frustrated. It is you don't want to go too far with it where it becomes overly cumbersome, but you don't want to have nothing either, because then people are doing things differently. They're reinventing the wheel constantly. I see this all the time. And then the final one is the one that organizations always look at is their financials. Companies don't exist to, it's not all about making money. As much as money is important, it's not about making money. People have purpose. Businesses have purpose. If you serve your purpose and do it really well, the money follows. But we still have to measure it. It is a measure, but there's things like cost, profitability, revenues, where we invest our money, ROI on those sorts of things. So we want to be sure we are measuring. So what do we need to do to be healthy financially? And how do we want to measure our success? Here are some examples that you can consider. And these are just generic examples. But if you think about customer satisfaction, customers think about defects in what you do or accuracy. That first bullet isn't completed, but it's really that's supposed to be customer satisfaction. Do you have a sense of what satisfaction really means? On-time delivery, timeliness. Within the organization, that's your culture piece. Do you have employee empowerment? Do people feel engaged? Are you working on things? Do you have a culture of process improvement or continuous improvement? Do people feel like they're part of a healthy and successful business where they have innovation? It could be product innovation, service innovation. It depends on what your business is. Internal operations, I think that obviously speaks for itself. And you'll notice I have employee satisfaction in there. That one can live under organizational development, but it also lives under internal operations. The reason being, if people are frustrated, meaning your employees are frustrated, that creates for an environment where people become disengaged. So we want to be sure we have that in there as well. But think about safety, cycle time. I mean, these are just basic examples. And of course, finance or the financial health, profitability, costs, ROI, revenue, those are all in there. So these are some things to think about. What I would suggest with this sort of thing, whether you're working with a team or an organization, define your critical success factors in all four categories, meaning what will define our success? What are our behaviors? What do we need to do? Our actions, our strategies in each of the four categories, define that, and then clearly measure or define what the KPIs are in each of these. So the specific results and outcomes you want to achieve. Those two create a wonderful guideline, a baseline for people and teams and organizations to succeed over the long run. But what's important here is define it. Don't assume. Make sure you absolutely define it so everybody is crystal clear. And as a whole, these four work together. One can impact the other. You might say our customers are really happy, our finances are great, and all companies really look hard at those. Oftentimes they'll ignore or don't spend enough time thinking about internal ops. And each one of these could impact the other. If your internal operations are cumbersome, too much red tape, your employees are frustrated, over time, that will have an impact on customer satisfaction, because lack of engagement with employees leads directly to poor retention of customers. There's a lot of studies out there. Don't take my word for it. You can certainly look for them yourself, but there is direct correlation to that. And if your customers aren't happy, it's going to impact your finances. So you can see how all four of these work together. All right, let me wrap up here, and then we can go to some questions. The four things I want you to walk away with here, based on these four items, create a roadmap for people. If you think about an organization, a team, a business, we have so many things going on. We have buildings, people, equipment, technology. It's a mass of things. Help people understand what their roadmap looks like, and that's where expectations do come in. It will drive ownership, and that's the key here. If we have ownership, your job gets a whole lot easier, and people are trying to achieve not just for themselves, they're trying to achieve for something bigger than that. It does help with constructive constructive and less confrontational conversations. It really does help with that. It does set a framework. It creates, it eliminates a lot of the challenges that come with having to have a conversation that may not be something you want to do, but you need to do. So it does do that. And then it does create clarity of purpose. And I think everybody on the planet needs some sense of purpose. It might apply to your life. It might apply to how you interact with your community. It definitely applies at work. And I think most people today, and especially the younger generation, are looking for a connection to purpose. And it doesn't have to be anything major or big or even earth-shattering. It just needs to make sure people recognize that their contribution matters and there is purpose to what they're doing. All right, that's the end of the webinar. We have a few minutes here for questions. Lori, can you share any questions with me?
We've had a couple of good questions come in. There appear to be coming a few more. Appear to be coming in. I can see some people starting to type. But
okay, perfect.
Also feel free to just turn your camera on and sort of put your face out there to ask your question directly. You don't have to enter it into the chat. One of the questions is, where is the line between effectively explaining expectations and micromanaging?
Well, the line is in how the leader behaves. And what I mean by that is if you are highly effective at setting the expectation, the action of setting the expectation up front, everything we've discussed today, I won't go into the detail because we've covered it well today. If you're highly effective in those actions, then the micromanagement, the action of having to check in with people or hover over people is not required. That's the big differentiator right there. It's not required at all. You should be able to comfortably, confidently set expectation with people, and through your process of regularly scheduled follow-ups, not unscheduled micromanagement, the micromanagement is not necessary at all. It really is a process of ensuring that your tempo, your cadence in working with people is aligned to the expectation setting process, not the micromanagement itself. What's the next question?
Very good. Next question is, how can you tell before the results come back whether your expectations have been communicated effectively? This is similar to the last question.
Could you just state that one more time?
Sure. How can you tell before the results come back whether your expectations have been communicated effectively?
Well, I think there's two ways to affect that. I think when in the process of setting the expectations, you want to encourage. It's not a transmission. It's not a directive. It's more of a conversation of expectation setting and understanding and alignment. So that's the first thing you want to do. You want to make sure that in the process of setting expectation, it is a two-way conversation. There is clarity. There are questions, and some of that will come down to the relationship you have with the person. But in general, you want to encourage that dialogue to make sure there is the expectations have been absolutely clear, The second one is in what I mentioned earlier, the leading and lagging indicators. The lagging indicators are the result was achieved or it wasn't. The leading indicators speak to the actions, the iterations, the part of the process leading up to the final result, the leading indicators. So you don't want to wait to the end. You want to have leading indicators to recognize, are we on track? Are expectations being met along the way? What's the next question? We get a few more minutes.
Definitely feel free to speak up, anybody, but one that came in about your comment on silos.
Yes.
You said, be sure to operate across silos, don't break them down. There's been a
Right.
lot of, I can agree with this one. There's been a lot of talk about how silo-driven mentality can be so detrimental to your culture, but what did that comment mean?
All right. No, good. I'd love to clarify that. Within any business, we have functional departments, or known as silos. And the reason why I'm saying don't break the silo down, it's more about how the silos interact with one another. It's the silos are internal customers to one another. For instance, marketing and sales are internal customers to one another. Sales and operations are internal customers to one another. Operations and logistics are, so if you think about how they operate together, but when I say don't break down the silo, meaning you want to have experts, subject matter expertise in those areas. You don't want your marketing team doing the engineering of a product. That makes no sense. So if you break down a silo, it means you're tearing apart the fabric of what a functional area department needs to be its best, the core competencies. So what I'm saying is, okay, let's make sure we understand that the value we commit to deliver to our customer is based on the ability of our functional area departments or silos to be absolutely top notch in what they do, and our ability to serve each other, internal customers along the way, to produce the result for the customer, to deliver that value that is promised. That's what it's all about. So it's about expectations between silos. It's about how we communicate across silos. It's how we respect one another. It's the expectation setting in terms of what's the ultimate value we're going to deliver and how can I be part of that. So there's a lot to it. I can't go into every aspect right this minute, but that's what I mean by don't break the silos down. We have to learn how to function across the silos more effectively. All right, we have one more question maybe,
Yeah, one more question.
and then we'll wrap up.
Thank you. I know people are going to have to start jumping off, but one more question was on if you happen to have any of those studies that talk about employee engagement impacting customer satisfaction. Do you have any studies that you can share?
Yes. Yeah, no, I certainly can. Let's see if I can pull something together on that. I try to update my research all the time. The ones I have might be a few years old, but let me go in there, and if I can find one that I'm allowed to share, because obviously some of this is copyrighted, I have to be careful with that. But yes, I will look for that, and I will make sure that if I can provide it to everyone, I will absolutely do that. All right, so folks, it is 10 o'clock. I do commit to getting things wrapped up on time. I want to say thank you, everyone. I know an hour out of your day, especially on a Friday, is a commitment. I'm hopeful that this served you well today. And if you have any questions at all about today's sessions or anything related to it, I'm always happy to speak with you offline or just answer it in an email. Very happy to do so. And I do hope you have an enjoyable Friday and great weekend. Thank you. Thank you for coming.